So we're talking about overnights. So it goes into overnights, but then the information is then distilled again.
So, um, if you're a client of Nielsen and you are an advertiser who wants to know what happened to those ads you ran yesterday, or a TV station executive who had the news on last night or a special program, or one of the cable networks with something, you now get information, real feedback, the next day on what the audiences look like from the previous 24 hours. Not only the programs, but in some cases nationally also on the commercials. So this is really helpful for people to program better, to plan, for advertisers to adjust campaigns. So let's say they decided they were going to put a certain amount of money and a certain amount of weight, as they call it, into this big campaign for a new product. And as they see the advertising delivery come back and the audiences and who's watching and how they reach their target, they can adjust their spending and adjust their plan that way. Plus a lot of advertising, almost $70 billion a year, is based on the ratings. And the reason is that advertisers need some way of measuring that audience for the commercials. And they set the value for the actual commercial, therefore for the program, based on what kind of audience is delivered. And they need that feedback really quickly, because if waiting months to get that feedback is really not feasible anymore, nor is it necessary. And so the way Nielsen measures, when we have meters that we use in homes, allows us to collect the information every night and send it back out to clients in the morning. What's changed, though, is the fact that a digital video recorder, the idea that you can watch your favorite program 5 minutes later than it was broadcast or cablecast, or a day later or 7 days later, and the commercials are in that program, and about slightly more than half of the people still watch all the commercials if they have a DVR. So advertisers and the sellers of time want to count that audience. Well, now in order to count that audience, you have to wait till the next day, and the next day, and the next day. And if you think about it, it's kind of ironic. So we have all this incredible digital technology that gives consumers the control and the choice, but it actually means you have to wait longer to get the audience for the program. So Nielsen has to process that information. We'll process it tonight, we'll process it the next night, we'll add it the next night, and we'll keep adding the audience to that program basically up to 7 days later. And so there are multiple sets of ratings and information that go out for a single program now. Not one, multiple. Makes the job bigger, but it's a more comprehensive view of what's actually happening with programming.
Can you see the fast forwarding of the commercials?
We know if you did that with our meter. We know if you skipped the commercial. Yes. We know if you fast forwarded. We know if you did something else with it, because we actually look at the minutes of the program. And that was one of the big technology changes we had to make as a result of the whole digital transition in the United States and all television being digital, is we had to change the way we measured television so that we actually have clients who put a code in the program, and that code then gets picked up, or the commercial gets picked up in the homes that we've recruited to be in our panel by our equipment. At the same time, we actually keep track of what I'll call signatures. So let's say for some reason that code didn't get into tonight's program. There was an equipment issue, there was something that happened. Well, I wouldn't want to miss the entire audience to the program, so we have a backup. And the backup actually consists of us having libraries, think of it that way, digital libraries, in about 420 places around the United States, where we collect actual all the programming and all the commercials for a lot of different channels. And we have what we call signatures, like a mark of that program and that commercial. So you're in my panel, you had your TV on, but our equipment can't see what it was you were watching because something happened to the code that the programmer was supposed to put in. So we would go to our signatures and match it, and we would know, and we're not missing. That way we're not missing ratings and programming. It's a lot of extra expense, it's a lot of extra complication, but there's so much money riding on having that right that we do that. And that's probably in the last 3 years been one of the biggest changes we've had to make with technology.
Do you keep the programming? Or does it?
Just for a little while, not for very long.
Have there been any broadcasters that refuse to put the digital signal on their shows?
No, not really. I mean, we have nationally measured television using a certain kind of code for the programming for probably 30 years. This is a different code, but the idea is very similar, and it's really easy. They do it as they send the programming out, and it's part of their whole distribution system, so it's really not been a significant issue.
Let's talk a bit about the panels themselves, how the people are chosen, and how they do what they do.
So I'm often asked as I travel around, people say, well, who's the Nielsen family? Like, they'll either say, I know one, or I was one, or they'll say, I've never known anybody who did it, but obviously, mathematically, there are a lot of them. I think a big part of our success as a company and our ability to still be in business this many years after we started measuring television relates to representing audiences fairly. And it's not an easy job, and in a changing world, it's a really even more difficult job every day. So being representative, what does that mean? That means that if I say I'm measuring Los Angeles or Chicago or the whole country, that I'm including people who get all the different kinds of television distribution, but also all kinds of people. And that I'm representing the population fairly. And to do that, we select housing units. We have statisticians, many of them. I'm not one, but we do have a lot of them who know how to select housing units. They don't select people. They select housing units. So it could be a house, an apartment, any kind of housing unit. And they do that randomly in a way that is representative of the whole community. And then we recruit the people in those housing units. And we do it lots of ways. We do, in some cities and markets, we actually call people. In some places we call first if we can, but then we recruit in person. And the reason we have what we call very high cooperation rate, meaning the people who actually accept when we ask, is because we go in person. And our membership representatives actually have made an art and a science out of getting you to say yes. And approaching people in all the right languages, with the right opportunity to convince people to say yes without changing their behavior. Because we have a fine line between getting you to cooperate. We pay very small incentives, not big ones, for people to cooperate. It's really about getting people's opinions. And close to half of the people we ask to do this agree. In the marketing research world, that's unheard of. But it's because we've been doing it for 50 plus years, and we spend a lot of time, energy, and money on getting you to say yes. Because people are very representative, and I would say probably it's one of the things that's least understood is the amount of time and energy that goes into selecting the panel. So once I get you to say yes, what happens? Well, if you're keeping a diary, which we still use in some markets, we're going to mail that to you. You're going to get one for every TV set in your home, and then you're going to mail it back. If you are part of one of our many panels that have meters, then somebody comes and they connect a meter to, which really looks like almost a set-top box, to each TV set in your home. And that will automatically then collect what you're watching on TV. And then I would also be teaching you how to use the People Meter remote that tells me who is sitting in front of the TV. And you would be coached. The home would have literally coaching from our membership representative and it would be the kids, the adults. There's a place in our meter for visitors, so that if you've got somebody over watching the game or some big event, you can actually put the age and the gender of the visitors in to the people meter. And so I think it's meant to capture most of the experiences.
How long is a Nielsen family? How long do they get to be one?
So the longest you can stay in the panel is 2 years, and if you move, you're out. So we don't follow you, because again, it's about the housing unit. So I think the average is now about 15 months that people are in the panel.
Are there any kind of confidentiality things that they have to adhere to?
Mm-hmm. Well, we keep their information confidential, and in today's world, that's a pretty big deal. And we ask that they not discuss it, but it would be hard to imagine that it doesn't occasionally get discussed. But there are very strong confidentiality, and our clients have very strong confidentiality agreements with us as well, so that, let's say somebody was in one of our panels and just decided to try to reach out to a programmer, they really have to turn that family back to us, and they do, and it has happened. And so I feel pretty good about the confidentiality.
Has it happened the other way, where the broadcaster will be lobbying to it?
If it did, usually other clients tell us about that. It turns into, again, because everybody's getting the same information on the same market. Everybody wants a level playing field. I can't think of more than a tiny number of times that might have happened. It's happened.
There's always a joke that people, if you have the meter, you're going to always watch PBS and that kind of thing. Do you see a lot of that, where people are not necessarily honest or skewed a bit because they are a Nielsen family?
We do look at the first couple weeks of programming, but if you think about it, whether it's a single person or a big family, that would be kind of a pain to do over a long period of time. So we don't see that over long periods of time. And we do other kinds of validation research, and our clients request and require us to do that, but that doesn't it probably isn't a big issue. And you can tell because you can see what people are watching, and they watch a wide variety of choices. Maybe the first couple days we pay attention to that, and we do monitor it, but it has not been a big issue long term. Particularly with the meter, because it's so automatic. It's just recording what you're watching.
What about panel sizes themselves? Have those changed over the years?
They've changed.
As well?
The panel sizes have changed significantly because there are more choices available, and the audience levels have become smaller. And statistically, you need larger sample sizes to represent those without a lot of variability. So, in my tenure with Nielsen, both our national service and then all the major markets have all had big sample size increases.
Do you get a lot of criticism about that it's still not big enough? Or
well, from the people who are using the data every day and who know literally how much variability is in the estimate, probably not as much as people who don't understand the statistics as well. It is hard for some people to grasp the concept that I don't have to measure everybody in order to project something with a sample. And actually, one of my favorite stories was Mr. Nielsen telling me that when he used to get that question a lot, that they would say, well, if you don't believe in sampling, the next time you go to the doctor's office and they ask for blood, you tell them, nope, take it all. You don't need the sample. The sample won't be enough. But most people, once you sit down and talk about all the other things that are impacted in our lives that require sampling, including census and other things, understand that there's really no limit on our sample sizes. So if clients wanted us to increase them, which they have over the years, and we work together with them to build the business model to do that, but you don't have to measure everybody in order to have a predictive set of estimates.
what about on the minority side? I know that Rupert Murdoch made that statement a few years ago. What is your opinion on that?
we have what I think is probably the most representative panels of anybody doing marketing research, because we do, in fact, measure every day in every city the ethnic composition of our samples and our panels, and our clients see that every day. So talk about a transparent system. I think our field reps, when I talked about them speaking all the different languages, a huge part of what we do is make sure that we're both selecting the right homes, but we're getting them to agree. So you need both of the things to happen, because we could select a really representative group of people and half of them would say no. Or half of the population that's particularly sensitive. That doesn't happen. We have really, really great representation as a result of a lot of hard work. It's everything from selecting the right people to advisory councils we now have on our African American Advisory Council, Hispanic, Latino, Asian American academics, business leaders, media company folks who basically look at our process and our procedures and say, here are ways you could both improve how you're approaching people, collecting information, and then use the results in ways that could be really impactful. And so we've pretty much opened up what we do to get advice. And I think it's resulted in absolutely the most representative panels we have, not only in ethnicity, but in age and geographic dispersion. And now it also has to be in the technology that people have, because there are differences in how you view programs and use the internet and other things. So it's actually a more and more complicated world to measure, but it's a big part of what we do. It's why we have statisticians, measurement scientists. We get outside advice. I'm very, very pleased with where the company is in that regard.
What about looking towards the future? Are there trends that you're starting to see on your own?
So, I mean, the big trend, we look at global trends, we look at global demographic trends, we look at technology trends, we have to look at all of it. We have to look at consumer electronics. And so we see two conflicting ones. People with really small screens, right? They're carrying around that are personal, from a phone to an iPad to whatever you want to call a small device you'll be carrying, to the big, big TV on the wall. And what that's done is lead people to just watching on the best screen available. It might be in your office. One of the things people don't love to hear, but it's true, is that there's a lot of video viewing during the day at work. So we've seen that. But I think it's just part of the fact that there's video available everywhere, that as we look around the world, we look at consumers who have phones, who will never have a landline. They will never probably have a PC. But their first experience, they will have a cell phone that allows them to get video and that connects them to the internet. And so we see sort of a big leap over some of the other distribution channels to cell phone, to everybody. We think every person in the world will eventually have a cell phone, and that will be their connection to many things. But it won't do away with the opportunity to watch on a big screen. So I see that trend. We obviously look at things like aging populations in developing nations at the same time. And the demand for consumer goods and for video and for entertainment, I think, continues in a world that is changing with developed and developing countries. So it's a global picture that we look at. But in the U.S., I think the integration of the TV and PC that we talked about before, and the idea that while I'm sitting here, talking to you, somebody is probably watching TV and on their PC, and a couple teenagers are sitting next to each other, texting each other while they're watching. And all of that interaction is something that advertisers and media companies and publishers are going to have to learn how to manage, because it's not going to get less complicated, it'll get more. So our job, I guess, is to take all that complexity and figure out what's possible to measure, and then figure out what's practical to actually help people get their jobs done and understand consumers better. And they're not always the same thing, what's possible and what's practical. But I think the evolution is for our company around technology and around what we measure has been to capture the consumer behavior, try to make it simple to understand in a very complex environment, and then help the clients grow. So I'm really pleased with with where we've come through a lot of ups and downs and a lot of changes, but we're still measuring market share. We're still measuring the share, and share still matters even with technology that allows you to look at every single second.
What about the demographics too? Everyone's always crazy about that 18 to 49 or group. Do you think that makes a big difference?
Well, for TV, there is a lot of conversation about young demographics, and so that gets back to that big trend of baby boomers and population changes and where disposable income is, because ultimately what happened many years ago is that there were studies that were done that said that you were really, really brand loyal as you got older, and you weren't open to changing brands. And that's why a number of advertising categories said, well, the only people you can get to switch brands are young. So that's why it's really important to target young viewers with advertising. But there's so many categories that doesn't make sense for, that I think more and more of the conversation is about, who's the right target for my advertising, who's the right consumer, and that's the right programming, online vehicle, whatever that I need to use. So we see people paying a lot more attention to much more specific demographics than the broad age category. They want to know about behavior, they want to know about lifestyle things, they want to know about a lot more than just the age. So I think it makes a much bigger difference going forward. And in fact, one of the studies, I guess done about a year or so ago on video consumer behavior showed that the one part of the population that had all the TV habits, but also the internet habits, was what we called the young boomers, who watched more TV and were on the PC and had all of that behavior together. So you have to be, the conventional wisdom isn't always exactly right.
It's be interesting to see what we see
I know.
down the pike with
Right.
that.
10 years from now.
You mentioned the Nielsen top 10s, and the more public face of Nielsen. How are those determined? When are they released?
So the things you might see in the newspaper or online or in magazines that have lists like top 10 broadcast programs, top 10 cable programs, top 10 movies, etc., are usually released once a week. One of the things that's changed because of DVRs is that we have to wait to calculate the ratings to make sure we've added the audience from the people who wait a day or two to watch the programming. Ironically, again, it's getting longer, not shorter, but they're usually released once a week and for the previous week. And now with a bit of delay because of what I just described, but all over the country we release those once a week, and it gives people a sense of what the most popular programs are.
How is the year-end one determined?
So we do year-end and we do season. The thing that a lot of people pay attention to, and again, this is a bit more traditional broadcast, the idea of a season that starts in the fall and would usually go through May. Broadcast season is actually calendar driven, so there's certain dates at which the premiere of programs would start. The new season programs would start on a certain day, usually in September, and we would look at the measurement of a whole series across the season, and it would usually go into the next year. So the broadcast season was always fall, almost more of an academic season, so it would be like the fall of 10 into the spring of 11. But what's changed is now not all programs work that way. A series might start and be ended after 4 episodes. Something else gets substituted. some of the cable programs actually and intentionally start in the summertime. So that idea of a season is a little bit different, but it's simply a calendar definition. And you could go in any day in any of Nielsen's software and produce program ratings, starting with a certain day for a certain program, ending with a different day in a different month, and calculate your own season. So we do have one definition that the networks usually agree to for the season, but I think it's a changing definition.
Do you get a lot of criticism for the ratings themselves?
Yeah, I think one thing I've learned is everyone has an opinion about television. You can go anywhere and everyone has an opinion about it. And because it connects to your life. Even if you tell me you don't watch television, you have an opinion about it. And because of that, and because of how much money is at stake in measuring a program and its advertising, there is a lot of discussion, particularly in the media business. And since the media reports often on the media, you will read when a program has questionable ratings and somebody doesn't understand why, and if they're not satisfied with the Nielsen, answers, you get some controversy. And so I often say you have to have a thick skin and a good sense of humor to work at Nielsen, but we do occasionally get criticism on any given day in any of the 210 markets we produce ratings for. In the United States, somebody's probably got a question, and often legitimately has a question.
Is there a series or a show that Nielsen has really always put on the block for having, driven the cancellation of other?
Well, as we say, we don't cancel programs. Programmers make those decisions. We certainly provide estimates of the audience. No, I don't think there's a specific program, but if you have been at the Nielsen Company for a long enough time, you've probably run into different people on the programming side who will tell you, because of you, I don't have my program anymore, or something else happened that hits me all the time. But it isn't a Nielsen decision. We just provide the estimates, and then there's a business decision to be made about the program itself.
Let's talk a bit about your work as an executive at the company. Can you describe a typical week in your life right now?
Well, my career's been a long career, and it's had many different chapters, so they've all been very different from each other. But right now, as vice chairman, I do a lot of public speaking. So I might speak at a panel on trends in television, and go to Washington to meet with different elected officials to talk about consumer behavior and what's happening with video, and then speak to one of our management development programs at the company and people we've just recently hired, and then sit in a strategic planning meeting and a budget meeting talking about what products we're working on and some of our business issues, and then meet with I spend a lot of time meeting one-on-one with clients to talk about what their big issues are. So I would sit with them and say, over the next 2 years, what are the 3 things that you're worried about, and what are you thinking, and what are your marketing and advertising needs, and how can Nielsen be more helpful, and what are the technology issues we need to be looking at. So it's a broad range of externally talking about things we see in the world and trends, gathering information so we can do our own strategic planning to make sure we're measuring what we need to measure, and then working with our own associates and our own team. So I have marketing, communications, public affairs, and government relations, and sales folks I'm talking to every day all over the world. So it's a great mix, actually. There's no day that's exactly alike.
When did that change for you? Was there, you said you had very different duties as you moved up the ladder.
So the last 2 years I've been the vice chairman. That's a global role. And before that was in charge of our global media business and product development. And before that, in charge CEO of the TV business in the U.S. for Nielsen. And I would say that role, built up from a number of different roles in the U.S. business. So probably the biggest change is the global aspect of the job, and then the fact that a lot of these other functions like public affairs and government relations and things are formally part of my portfolio, as of last week, all the initiatives we have around diversity. So all the things we were talking about and making sure we have representative panels, well, our company needs to be equally representative of consumers, and so all those initiatives. So it's a full plate.
What is your management style?
My management style, I like to pick the right people. I like to work with them to set a strategy. I like to listen to clients, listen internally, listen to other kinds of sources of information around the world, make sure we've got a clear picture of where we're going, set a direction, and then let the right people you've hired just go do it. And be available if they need you, but not micromanaging. It's too big a company. We're in over 100 countries. We've got so many things going on. You really have to hire the right people, have a clear strategy, and let them go do it.
Do you feel like your work week are 24-hour days and you always working?
I think it'd be fair to say I'm always thinking about topics that relate to consumer behavior. But it's actually fun because it is something that relates to everybody. So whether I'm in the grocery store shopping and thinking about that, or I'm watching something on TV, or I'm listening to clients talk about something, or I'm at a technology conference, all these things actually connect to what we do. So it's hard to turn your brain off from the implications, and I wouldn't want to. And technology with a BlackBerry and with everything else certainly attaches you. So I think you have to consciously turn it off. And I do that with my family. But the world is global and 24/7, and so certainly absorb information that applies to Nielsen all the time.
And what is it about being a woman in the business? You said that you didn't know what you didn't know back then. What have you learned?
I think actually it's some of the same things that I said about working at Nielsen, which is, you better have a good sense of humor and sometimes a thick skin. I think it's very, very different now than even 30 plus years ago when I started working. And I was really, really lucky. And I started working with great people who mentored me, men and women. And it was about doing the job. And I was very lucky. I just focused on kind of interesting assignments and learning. It would be untrue to say there weren't moments when I thought, wait a minute, I'm the only woman in this room. This is not okay. But that's something that I decided that I would just help change. And so both in hiring and building development programs within our company and working with clients and making sure our company is open and representative, I just decided that the other way to play that was to make as many changes possible as you could and to mentor a lot of people, men and women. So sometimes it's harder than other times, but I don't think about it most of the time.
You mentioned mentors that you've had. Can you talk about some of them?
Some of the business leaders, starting at the very beginning with the company. Well, first in my family. I've had amazing women in my family, between my mother, my grandmother, aunts, my dad with his creativity. So I'd start there. And then I would say at Nielsen, in the management training program I went into, it was hosted and taught by the top of the media business. So I was really lucky. I mean, I was 22 years old, right out of school, and working with the leaders of the business, and they were very generous with time and advice. Yeah. So that's an opportunity not everybody gets, which is why we've started those programs again. And then I kept getting assigned to really creative, interesting people. So I worked for one person for more than a decade, and he just let me basically take on any assignment. And I think that was a great experience. And then the fellow who preceded me as CEO at Nielsen, John Dimling, was a great mentor to me. And and then as I've gone forward, I've been learning a lot from our board members, from volunteer work I do, from my current boss, Dave Calhoun, who's a pretty renowned business executive with a very different background than mine. So I think each place you go, you can pick up something. But I also use the outside experience to inform and learn different board positions, not-for-profits. I think you can pick up a lot from different people in all different settings.
So the company's changed hands a few times during your career. Yeah. How has that affected your work and the company as a whole?
So we've started as a family-owned company, and obviously I've been in very different roles, so it's affected me differently because in some cases it probably had less day-to-day direct impact than others. But we have been family-owned, acquired by a large public company, spun off into different public companies, spun off again into other public companies, acquired, and now private. And each situation has had different pros and cons and different business realities, but I've been really lucky because I've just grown with different assignments. You learn a lot about business models, you learn a lot about different management styles, you learn a lot about different ownership requirements. So that's the other side of it. I think it's affected the company at different points in its history, very different ways. Right now, being privately held, it's actually been very good because we did both a lot of acquisition work and restructuring that we wanted to do to be more efficient. And we got to do all of that while being private. And I think that was exactly the right time for us to do all that. So that's actually been a good thing.
How would you define the company's brand?
I think the brand is, I hope the brand is understanding consumer behavior better than any other company in the world. I believe it stands for high quality research, integrity, independence in the measurement, and innovation around how we measure and what we measure, and providing clients with that insight into consumer behavior, what people watch and what people buy. That's what we strive for. And I go all over the world, and even in countries where people haven't directly been as exposed to what we do, business leaders still know the Nielsen brand. And it's a positive awareness of it. They may not actually understand all the ins and outs of what we produce, but it has a very positive brand image in many places around the world.
In your career, what is the most surprising thing you've ever learned about consumer behavior?
Well, I think one of the biggest things has been the last couple of years of learning how much time consumers would spend both on video, online, and everything put together, and how this is continuing to expand. I don't think anyone would have predicted that. And the idea that you're watching over 8 hours a day in the average household of television, and then you've got time online, and you've got, if you think about, you're on the phone, you're texting, you're on, all of this coming together is very surprising. And for the future of the media and entertainment business, I think it's a good thing, but it's an interesting consumer dynamic.
What about society as a whole?
Well, I think everybody has the choice to turn things off. Hard, but you do have the choice. And as the mother of 2 young children, I watch how they have adapted, and they could use computer technology and all the equipment in the home at age 2 and 3. And I watch that, and I realize that from a mom's point of view, you have to be careful. But on the other hand, the world that they have available to them, that's the pro of it. The science, the technology, the history, the entertainment, the global aspects of media and technology are pretty phenomenal if used in the right way. And so that's the way I choose to look at it.
What has been the biggest challenge in your career?
I think it's probably been thinking about what we need to build as a company. So what's the next step? What's the next strategic direction for the business? And then getting some sort of agreement among clients who often have very different points of view. It's negotiating change. The biggest challenge, and probably the thing I spend most time on, is negotiating change, whether it be internally at the Nielsen Company in order to meet that strategy and get it done, or externally with clients or other stakeholders trying to get a common view of what's next. Because often people haven't agreed, and buyers and sellers might have different points of view in our client base. Broadcasters and cable companies might have different views, and for Nielsen to be a syndicated business and for people to use the same information, we actually have to have one set of metrics, and every change in the metrics impacts someone's business, and so that's why you often read about it, you hear about it. It has a real impact. If it didn't have a real impact, it wouldn't be important. And so it's reminding ourselves that we have to negotiate that change carefully, but at the same time keeping ahead of what's changing in consumer behavior. Weighing those two things of this is where we need to go, but we have to bring everybody with us and we have to do it thoughtfully. That's the biggest challenge.
What do you think has been your greatest achievement in the business so far?
Oh gosh. I feel very good about some of the teams I've built of people and at the Nielsen Company. Some of the relationships we have with some wonderful clients that are the relationships with the companies between Nielsen and the clients are decades long. I love that we've been in a place where we can watch our clients' businesses grow, and I feel very good about the fact that we're a well-regarded company and how we approach some of the things we were talking about before, the representation of people in our panels, the technology that we're actually using to measure TV and the internet, because all of that's required us thinking ahead, like 5 years, 10 years, and having plans in place when people weren't even really grasping the need. So I feel really good about looking ahead in a world that's changing really quickly. You can't ever sit still, but at least for this moment in time, I think we've put ourselves in a good position to help clients because we've all constantly had to do that.
Any regrets in the business or big stumbles?
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure if you talk to many clients, you get many, and colleagues, you probably get some. But anything that we've done that you later wanted to go back and think about differently has generally related to the pace of change. So either you should have taken longer or been faster about it, and just the constant conversation that you need to have in the dialogue about that change. Every friction point comes back to that. And so if I ever look back on things, which I do always, and say, could we have done that better? It's usually because we needed to either give ourselves more time or talk about it more.
You've been with the company for 32 years. That's
Yeah.
at one company. What are your thoughts on that? Being at one place for your career?
It surprises me every day. I never intended for that to happen. It happened a week and a year at a time, with really interesting assignments and the next thing and the next thing, and you do it for a year or two, and then and then 5 years have gone by. But I've been so fortunate, really. It's not really the same company at all. So in some ways, it's the same Nielsen company, but the work we're doing, the global aspects of it, the products we're offering, the ownership we have has all been different. So I like to think I got to do a lot of interesting jobs. I just didn't change the brand name of the business, but it's unusual. But what's also kind of interesting is I actually have clients I've worked with almost that long, and so it's not impossible. It may be unusual, but it's not impossible.
What advice would you give someone who wanted to follow in your footsteps?
Find a group, find a passion, find a direction, make sure you know, and it may not be the first thing you try. It might be that you have to try several, but you really have to feel good about going to work because it's a big part of your life. Work with people who teach you, tolerate different points of view, continue to learn. I mean, one thing I think that's absolutely essential is every year you have to set goals for yourself that make you stretch into the things that are uncomfortable. Because if they're not uncomfortable, then they're probably not things that you're learning that are new. And be very, very tactical about that. So find the right place where you fit, you know, but at the same time, you don't want to get too comfortable. You need to be looking at the environment and find a great set of people to work with, because it's a big part of your life. And I've been really lucky to work with intelligent, thoughtful, you know, people where we could actually have fun. And that's the advice I'd give. And if you do that, I think you're pretty fortunate.
Where do you see your career going in the next 10 years?
I'm so busy right now. Think about, well, we're just embarking on a whole set of new things that connect what people buy and what people watch with new products. We've got a whole set of diversity initiatives that we're initiating to make sure our company continues to lead in being very representative. I've got every kind of thing to follow in terms of consumer behavior and how technology is changing it. I think those will continue to evolve, and I don't see the next barrier. I just see opportunities for the next couple of years to build on those programs, and then we'll see.
Yeah, I hope we'll come back and and see where it went from today. But thank you so much, Susan.
Thank you.
Good.
When people talk about TV ratings, and there are a couple really simple ideas. We want to know what channel someone's watching or what program, and we want to know who, what age, other things about them, you know, male, female, things like that. And we do that a number of different ways. And those methods have changed a lot since we started measuring television. And we've just got some of the examples. And these things are changing all the time. But just to give you a basic idea, when we started measuring television, when television started in the early 1950s, we had a really simple device that basically recorded what channel and how much time someone was spending on that channel. And then at the same time, when we wanted to know, and today, when we want to know who is watching TV, one of the ways we do that in some places around the United States is we still call people up and ask them to keep what we call a diary for a week. And it's pretty simple and straightforward. You write down the channel. You answer some really basic questions. You write the channel, you write down who's watching, and that's it for the amount of time that you're doing that. And we get these back. These have changed over time. The questions have changed. They're in English and Spanish. There's a website on the front so that you can go to that, and we're actually testing an online diary. But the idea of asking people to write down who's watching, their age, and what, and for how long. Pretty basic idea that has evolved and been tested a lot. Probably the more complex thing we've had to do is measure with a meter. We call it a meter because it's connected and automatically metering what's happening on the TV set. So that meter has changed a lot from the very beginning in the early 1950s to a couple different examples I have here. Probably the most recent one is this one that would go on top of any TV set in your home. You wouldn't really see it. It would be collecting information like a little computer in the background and sending information back to Nielsen every night. But that wouldn't tell me. That would tell me what's on your TV. It doesn't tell me who. The who part, the people, is called a people meter, and that's this device that looks like a remote control. Has a button for up to 16 people. We have these with 8 buttons for most homes, and we have some with 16 if you really got a big household with multiple generations living at home. and there's a button assigned to each person in the home. And when we come and install the equipment and teach the home what to do, and being a Nielsen panel, we go through this. And so if I were watching TV and my button is button 1, I sit down, I turn on my TV, I don't do anything else with that, but I would be asked and prompted to push button 1 when I started watching and button 1 when I left. And that tells us at Nielsen the demographics, or the who, of who's watching television. What's on the TV and how we measure that has evolved a lot. Our engineers have had to deal with digital technology, with all kinds of different ways that TV gets into the home. And so that's why you see different meters that are sitting here.
That one it says it's a local? Is it?
What that means, what that really means is we use the same people meter in our national panel and in individual cities. And in the Nielsen lexicon, that means local, like a local market like Chicago or New York, but it really is the same equipment. These are different versions of that people meter that have been developed over time.
So the newer ones have screen prompts as well, on screen?
No, not on screen on your TV, but a light actually flashes on the people meter. So button 1's light, you sit down, you turn your TV on, and it's going to prompt you. Somebody must be there if you've turned on the TV, and so you need to push your button, and then the light isn't prompting you anymore. And that's all. But that's all happening on this little people meter device, or on the meter, not on your TV.
What happens if someone doesn't sign out with their button?
So we know that. So we know the TV is on or off, and we know that we don't change anything about the behavior. If it goes on for a long period of time, and you have the TV on, but nobody's prompted to be there, you haven't said you're there, and you haven't said you left, we will, in fact, after a couple days, there's a certain set of rules that are very explicit, probably call you back and say, okay, do we need to provide more coaching, more instruction, whatever.
Oh, one more question about just that I didn't ask you is, what amount of time constitutes the viewing of a program?
So we actually record every 11 seconds what somebody's watching on TV, and then we calculate it back up to a minute. So we produce average minute ratings, and then we take all the minutes, and we know when a program starts and when a program ends, and we average the rating for all those minutes for that program. We also produce ratings for the set of commercials. So let's say there's a commercial pot for 3 minutes in between a program. We produce an average rating for that set of commercials as well, but we don't have ratings every single minute. So you can get down to minute by minute, and many clients do, analysis of your program. The plot changed, the talent was different, anything else, and you can actually look at that.
And what constitutes, though, in terms of someone watching, do they have to watch the whole program, or a certain amount of minutes that say, okay,
I'm sorry, okay. No, it doesn't work quite like that. So the average is truly just all the audience to that program, and some people will watch it for a minute, and some people will watch the whole duration. And it's just a mathematical average of the people and the number of minutes that they put in. So you count in national television if you watched a minute, and someone else would count if they watched the whole thing. You don't have the same weight, but you're both getting counted into the audience.
Thank you.
Yeah.